Welcome back to Quantum Healthy. And today we have a very special guest. Actually, we have two guests here. I have to admit, looking for those of you on YouTube, you will notice we have a little girl here. What's her name?
Oh, this is Zara or Zara.
Zara. Okay, well, welcome Amy and Zara. So we have Amy Jaramillo. Am I saying that correctly?
Jaramillo, but you can say Jaramillo. That's fine.
Jaramillo?
Jaramillo.
Ijo, I love it. Okay. So she is a quantum pelvic floor therapist, a home birth mama, an educator, and an occupational therapist. She founded, I believe, Body Motion and Love Mechanics, and her business is located in South Florida. It's been operating since 2019 as the first women's pelvic health concierge clinic with a mission to revolutionize women, women's empowerment through pelvic health. And basically, she's helping empowered women, I love that, empowered women, heal and core postpartum, also to stay fit before, during, and after pregnancy, and to help find their pelvic power, and also to connect to their pelvic floors and enhance core function and pelvic health. So really, this is primarily targeted for the ladies, although we may have some husbands tuning in who might want to learn more, and I think that's a fabulous idea. And I just want to share before we start, and we're going to ask you, actually ask Andeea to start us off, but I just want to share that you're on Instagram, fabulous Instagram. I always call you guys the Instagram goddesses because your shares are so graphic and you just feel, your heart warms when you see some of the, like you can see Amy on the beach with her baby and think, these beautiful visuals, very creative. But
Happy
you're
place.
very, pardon me?
I said it's my happy place.
It's your happy place. I can believe it, especially in Florida. And so I just find you're really open and instructive. And there's lots to learn just from just spending a few minutes on her Instagram. So, and I've had my own pelvic floor journey. It will probably come up here and there. It's not over yet. So I'm really excited about what I'm going to learn today. But I wish I had known you 26 years ago before I had my first babies, which, impacted a few things. So on that note, I'll hand it over to Andeea to start us off.
Yeah, Amy, thank you so much for being here. So why don't we just start off with you sharing a little bit about how you became an OT and then specifically a pelvic floor specialist, and then how you found quantum biology? Because that's how we all know you. We all know each other through the Institute of the Applied Quantum Biology.
Yes. So I began pelvic floor in 2019, as Laura mentioned, and it was sort of unexpected. So the way I was originally just like a general occupational therapist. I worked in a hospital. I think at that point I was about 4 or 5 years in the hospital. Now, when I recently, about 2 years ago, when I stopped working in the hospital, I had about 8 years experience in the hospital. But while I was still in the hospital, I was working as a general OT with older adults in rehab in the inpatient and acute care setting. And this was with adults who were experiencing osteopathic conditions. Maybe they've had surgeries, maybe knee surgeries, even heart surgeries. Some were very complex. A lot of neuro patients, people who have had strokes, brain injuries, so car accidents, so traumatic brain injuries. Anything under the sun. That's I was working with these individuals as an occupational therapist. And if the if you're not familiar with what occupational therapy does in the hospital, we're very similar to physical therapy. So we do help the individual start walking again and start moving their body again. But with occupational therapy, we focus mostly on activities of daily living and getting someone back on their feet and doing the things that they have to do every day, like going to the bathroom, putting their clothes on. So that's what I was doing in the hospital. And one day I was with my husband talking on the couch, and we were talking about having a family, starting our family, and we were saying how we want to have a lot of kids. We want at least six. And all of a sudden it just hit me. And I'm very active individual, love to exercise, work out, do a lot of activities, especially as an OT. That's important to me. So then it just hit me. I'm like, what about my recovery postpartum? Is my body going to be able to handle all these babies? What happens? Like, no one ever talks about how do you rehabilitate your body? You have to rehabilitate, just like you would have to rehab after any kind of big injury or event. Not that pregnancy and labor is an injury, but it does require some rehabilitation and recovery and healing. So something that popped in my mind, and I grew very fearful of labor and pregnancy and birth and everything. I was extremely fearful. And so out of that, I remembered I started researching online, and I came across something that said pelvic floor rehabilitation. And I remembered when I was in OT school, we were learning how to do manual muscle testing of different skeletal muscles. And our professor completely skipped over the pelvic floor. And, we got to the page and we saw a vulva and a penis on the page. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but
Yeah,
we
it's
saw
fine.
that on the page. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. Like, we're going to learn this. And my professor's like, oh, no, we're going to skip this. And you're only going to learn this if you decide to specialize. And I was like, what? Like, this is the coolest stuff. Anyway, I had that flashback while I was sitting here on the couch and researching and talking with my husband. And then I was like, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to learn, not just for myself, but for other women.
Yeah.
And it's in my scope of practice. It's something I can do. And I started researching really for myself and learning how to rehab the pelvic floor for myself and what it means to connect to your pelvic floor and connect to your pelvic power. And then I decided, you know what, this is what I need to specialize in. And as an occupational therapist, I can do that. So that's how I kind of went. I took a turn, and I left the hospital. I started already practicing while I was still working in the hospital. But when I had my first daughter, that's when I officially decided I'm not going to go back to the hospital, and I'll just do my own practice on the side, which I was already doing. So that's how I got into that.
Cool.
Amy,
Awesome.
Amy, is that like, is it typical of OTs, occupational therapists, to do pelvic
So
floor therapy? Because I've only ever heard of physios doing it.
yes, that's a great question. So in other countries, they would refer to occupational therapists as physiotherapists as well, but it is mostly in the United States, mostly physical therapy dominant or dominated, but there are occupational therapists that specialize in pelvic floor as well. So when I took my first pelvic floor course to work towards the bigger certification, you don't need to be certified, but if you're working towards that PRBC certification, you take these courses in consecutive order. And I remember when I took my first one, I was the only OT in there. And then the second one, there was one other OT. But we can do the same things that physical therapists do. We learn the same skills. And it really depends. It matters how confident you are in your skills. Like, you're not going to do something that you're not comfortable doing. So you wouldn't get into pelvic floor therapy if you wouldn't be comfortable doing an internal assessment. And you get the training. So yeah, we can, occupational therapists can do it.
Well,
Yeah.
let's maybe start this off talking about some aspects of the pelvic floor. I guess, yeah. Tell us about the pelvic floor. Maybe the anatomy of that. That might
I'd love
might be a
to.
good
I
way to start.
actually
Yeah.
I have my model here. I'll do my best with one hand to show you the model. So I brought it with me. Basically, it's a bowl-shaped group of muscles that sit at the bottom of the pelvis, and you can see it here on the outside. The red is skeletal muscle. And this bowl shape contains our pelvic organs. So you would find a bladder, and I'll just be speaking mostly on women because that's my bread and butter's female clients. So you have the bladder that sits right in front, and then directly behind the bladder, you have I don't know if you can see it, you have the
Yeah.
vaginal canal, and on top the uterus, and then the ovaries on the sides. So
Okay.
this is that we're sitting inside the pelvis, and the pelvis if it was facing like this. So you have the bladder first, then the vaginal canal, then right behind it you have the rectum. And so these are the pelvic organs that are housed in this space. And basically, it's a group of muscles, depending on how you categorize them, because they come in pairs. Some of them come in pairs on each side, symmetrical. Some of them don't have pairs, but it's 16 to 21 different muscles And so it's a lot. It's not just like one muscle. It's a lot of different muscles with different angles of pull, different attachment points inside the pelvis. And it's got a big job. Our pelvic floor is, I would say, highly neglected, but it's got a very big job. There are five functions of the pelvic floor. And so I'll just list some of them if that's okay.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so supports, as I mentioned, they support these pelvic organs. Their job is to be able to help maintain the intra-abdominal pressure inside our body and intrapelvic pressure to help keep these organs in place, because it's a very small area, but all of our organs fit in there perfectly. And so when things start to move a little bit, things can get wonky, and that really depends on the health of our pelvic floor. So one of the main functions is support these organs, and sitting is another function. We are meant to be able to sit. And this is part of support. I'm going to categorize these together. But if something's wrong with the pelvic floor, sitting can be very painful for someone. The pelvic floor is meant to help stabilize our spine and our inner core unit. Sorry, baby.
I'm just thinking sciatica is coming up for people with SI issues. It could because they have trouble
It
sitting.
could potentially have to do with the pelvic floor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And sometimes it's they think it's sciatica, but it could be a different nerve that's being impinged in the pelvic region. And so lots of times they'll categorize something, or they'll diagnose sciatica, but it could be I'm drawing a blank on what it's called right now, but it could be another nerve that's just being impinged, and they're calling it sciatica, but it's actually not sciatica. So sitting is a function, and then we have sexual functioning is a big part of it. Our ability to orgasm is part of that, is part of the pelvic floor health. Hold on one second. Sorry.
Just for those listening that can't see the visuals, she's multitasking. She's breastfeeding.
Yeah, sorry.
At the same time.
Thank you. There's the sphincteric role of the pelvic floor, the pelvic floor is meant to be able to, it's responsible for storage and elimination of bowel and bladder. So when we go number 2, it's responsible for holding it there before we get to the bathroom, and then releasing at the proper time. Same thing with urine. It's responsible for keeping our urine inside our bladder and not releasing it at an inappropriate time. So there's that. So I said stabilize, support, sphincteric, sexual function. And then some people call this, I used to call it the sump pump action, but I don't like sump pump anymore, because I learned that has to do with like trash or something. And I'm like, the pelvic floor is so beautiful, so let's not call it sump pump. Basically, the pelvic floor, a major role of it is it's a pumping system to bring blood and lymphatic fluid from the bottom of our body back up to the top. So it does have this action, kind of like we have the valves in our veins, and a big one is in our our legs. Basically, we have these valves that they shunt blood up through our veins back up to the top of our body against gravity. Our pelvic floor is meant to do the same thing. And then so those are the five S's of the pelvic floor functioning, but I always include pregnancy, labor, and delivery. So our pelvic floor plays a role in delivery or birth of babies, in that their job is to be able to lengthen and get out of the way. So sometimes this is not included in these 5 roles. So I like to group support and stabilize together into one group. And then pregnancy is my number 5, because it really does, it does show the health of the pelvic floor. If a woman's not able to lengthen properly, if she has really major tearing, and if the pelvic floor is not lengthening, that has to do with the health of the pelvic floor during labor. So if the pelvic floor is too tense, too tight, this can lead to tearing during a childbirth. So it is important to be able to have the ability to shorten, these muscles should be able to shorten and lengthen. And I can get into that a little bit more if you guys want. But I'll let you continue with the questions because I
Okay.
know I
Yeah.
can go off. I can go off.
Oh, well, you can tell, you can hear your passion with the subject because probably you're helping so many women, right? And you just know so many other women could use this information.
So many.
I guess I want to ask a question about just again back to the anatomy before we get into more conditions, I guess. With the pelvic floor, how does it move?
Good.
And I'll tell,
Yes.
yeah, if you don't answer I'll
Yeah.
tell you
No, great
my other
question.
question.
So the pelvic floor is one part of our what's called our inner core unit. The inner core unit is made up of these parts: the pelvic floor, our multifidus muscles, which are deep stabilizer muscles of the spine, our deep abdominals called the transverse abdominis, and our diaphragm. So these four parts make up our inner core unit. And our pelvic floor has a natural tendency to move with our breath. And actually, it mirrors our diaphragm. So the diaphragm is this dome-shaped muscle that sits underneath our lungs. And as we inhale, they work. So they're working as we inhale, they contract. And when they contract, they kind of like expand and move down. They flatten and move down. And so our pelvic floor, and then as we exhale, there's a natural recoil of the lungs, and that diaphragm just comes back to its normal resting space length and resting space. So it's inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And our pelvic floor is mirroring our diaphragm. So I like to think of these as muscles that work together. There's antagonist, protagonist muscles, and these ones work together. So they would be considered, I think the word is protagonist. And so they're as we inhale, the diaphragm moves down, and then the pelvic floor also slightly moves down. The muscles lengthen and they move downward. So if you think of this pelvic bowl, these muscles would be moving down away from the core center where my finger is as we inhale. And then as we exhale, they slightly come back up. So it's inhale, exhale, and this happens. It's a very small, light movement. It's not a massive, like some women don't even feel that it's happening, but it is happening. Some women might not feel that it's happening, maybe because there's some tension in the pelvic floor muscles. But there's this natural movement as we inhale and exhale. And also, anytime we take a step, if we're walking, anytime our heel strikes the ground, our pelvic floor slightly contracts. So this is referred to as the natural pelvic floor reflex, that there's this reflexive action of the pelvic floor to slightly contract as we walk with every step. Same thing when we're sneezing or coughing, there should be a natural tendency for the pelvic floor to slightly contract. And when I say contract, think of that analogous to slightly moving up. So when it contracts, it goes like this. And basically for the sphincters, they close. And so I like to show this. Let me see if I can, yeah, I could do this like this.
You're doing
So
well with one arm.
thank you. Think of muscles. So these are considered skeletal muscles. Think of this is a normal state of the muscles, like
Yep.
resting length.
Right.
As they lengthen, it's like this. As they contract, it's like this.
Okay.
So think of the pelvic floor lengthening and then contracting. And this is basically what a Kegel is. It's that contracting. When we hear the word Kegel, that's basically what it is. But people think it's only this, and really it should be this and this. Just like a bicep curl, you're not just doing this when you're doing a bicep curl with a dumbbell, you're going the full range of motion. And that's important for our pelvic floor. We want to have that full range of motion.
Oh, that's really good. Okay, so I just thought of I have a question for you, but then I thought of another one when you said being prone to tearing. So, I work with a lot of people who have, with addiction, but a lot of these people have some kind of trauma, and they will hold their trauma in their pelvic floor. Hence, it will be tight. And so I just wanted you to just discuss that or anything that you may know about that, because I know it can cause painful intercourse and incontinence and bladder pain and what have you. But when you were just talking about if it is tight, being prone to tearing, I don't know. I'm curious now, people who have, whether it be complex trauma or PTSD, if they're prone to tearing when they have a baby.
That's a good that's a good, I haven't thought about that connection, but yes, I think there could be a connection if they're already experiencing pelvic pain from tension. So let me rewind a little bit. Number one, there are it's a known fact that a lot of people who have experienced trauma, chronic pelvic pain is prevalent in a lot of these people. I can't tell you exact numbers and stats. I actually was looking that up to see if there's an exact stat, but I couldn't find one. But it is prevalent. They are linked, and that's known. Just as we can hold tension in our upper back, in our and like this trap area, people can hold tension down in their pelvic floor. And these are actually the top two places to hold tension in our body. It's up here and the pelvic floor. So, and chronic pelvic pain from tension, it's not fun. So if someone does hold most of their tension up here, like they're considered lucky, because having the tension down in the pelvic floor can lead to all sorts of heartaches and problems, and it's not fun. But definitely tension is stored in the pelvic floor. And I have this very interesting story. It didn't happen to me with one of my clients, but it was a professor of mine who gave us this really great example, and I've never forgotten it. If I could share it here, I think this will really point to the complexity of trauma and the pelvic floor and how we store things. And just through a quantum lens, we know that our body stores memory, and we know that it's through the exclusion zone water that surrounds our fascia and muscle. So, and that memory is stored in the body, whether it's you're conscious of it, subconsciously that memory is there. And so this story is a great example of this. It was basically a woman she was married, and she was experiencing a lot of pain during intercourse with her husband. And turns out that her husband was abusive. He was verbally abusive, emotionally, and physically abusive. And so whenever they would have sex, it was very painful for her, and it was not enjoyable. He ends up having an affair with someone, and lo and behold, intimacy with this person and having sex with this person was not painful at all. And so it just goes to show that, I'll never forget how my professor put it, but she said the pelvic floor it's like a guard dog, and it remembers. So it's like when she would be confronted with her husband who was abusive, that guard dog would be on defense and guarded. Basically, that's what happens with the pelvic floor. It's guarded, it tenses up, and it remembers. And with this other individual, there was no issue. The guard dog was not on defense, and everything was fine. So it's very interesting, but not every case is like that. Sometimes people are just, they have tension all the time. So it may not be based on situation, it could just be all the time. So yeah, and if you don't work on this tension prior to pregnancy, and maybe even during pregnancy, that tension can lead to tears during pregnancy. But I do want to say that women are actually, we're meant to tear during childbirth. It's not like our bodies know what they're doing. So if it does need to tear a little bit, which a lot of women do, it's okay. And we actually heal wonderfully. So women get so afraid of tears, but actually we heal so wonderfully, and our bodies are so capable. So I just wanted to put that out there so that I don't scare women from not having babies, because having babies is a beautiful thing.
Yes, yeah, we don't want to instill any fear here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the bladder itself, if we could. We'll stay away from the baby part. We may just
Oh
have
yeah,
to
sure.
have to
Sure.
have you back on, because there's so much we can go to, right, with
A lot.
postpartum. Oh my goodness. Okay, but let's just go back to let's pretend a woman hasn't had a baby, or whatever, maybe she has, but just with bladder, the bladder itself and incontinence. Incontinence, for the people that don't know what that word is, it just means where you can't stop the leakage, or like
Yeah.
you're leaking, I guess. You don't have the control. But so what, I'm taking this from a post that you did that I thought was fabulous. What are the 5 bladder habits that you don't consider normal?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
I've got them answers here in case, don't stress though.
I
But
have them too, and I'll dive into them a little bit more than just the one-liners I have. But so a big one, number one, is peeing more than 8 times in a day. So urinating more than 8 times in a day is considered having frequency issues, frequency
frequency.
incontinence. There's 5 different types of incontinence.
Oh yeah.
Frequency is a big one. I
Okay.
can list them. There's stress. Yeah, of course. There's stress urinary incontinence, urge urinary incontinence, which is also considered urge and frequency, they go together. They're urge incontinence and frequency incontinence. There's mixed urinary incontinence, so having a mix of the stress and the urge, that's considered one. And then there's overflow urinary incontinence. But the main ones, and oh, actually, there's 6 of them.
What would overflow? What would that be?
Overflow incontinence is the involuntary leakage of urine from an overdistended bladder due to impaired detrusor contractility. Detrusor is basically the inside muscle of this bladder. So it's impaired, so you're overflowed. And basically, our bladder is supposed to send a message to the micturition center in our brain and tell the bladder to contract. So sometimes when there's too much stretching of the bladder, there can lead to tone issues of this. This is different than skeletal muscle. It's smooth muscle, and that's basically, it's not consciously controlled. But if there's too much distension of that and someone doesn't realize that they're holding so much, overflow incontinence basically means that your bladder is it's overfilled, and then you start to leak, which is better than it going back up the other way and going back to your kidneys.
Right.
So it having too much urine can lead to backflow and lead to problems, and this is an emergency if that happens. So overflow incontinence is actually better than it going up to your kidneys. But that's the overflow. But the main ones that we see in the general population, especially amongst women, is stress urinary incontinence and then urgency and frequency incontinence. Those are the main ones that we see. And yeah, do you want me to dive into
No, that's good. Yeah, so you're saying peeing more time. So the 5 habits are
Oh
peeing
yeah,
more than 8 times a day, right?
yes. So that's considered urgency.
Urgent.
Another one, number 2, is leaking urine when coughing, laughing, sneezing. Anytime you're putting some kind of stress on your body, even bending down to pick up your baby, sometimes women will just like leak urine, or during pregnancy, they'll just bend down and then there's like leakage. That's actually considered stress urinary incontinence. And then so number 3, 5 bladder habits that aren't considered normal is having a strong urge to pee within 30 minutes of having just peed, or even within an hour of just having gone. So if you're going every 30 minutes or once every hour, that's not a good habit to, you want to try to break that habit. And then number 4, if you're avoiding exercise, jumping, or trampolines for fear of leaking, this is also a bad habit. Number 5 is waking up more than once in the night to pee. And I would argue waking up at all to pee if you're not pregnant or if you're not over the age of 80. But waking up at all to pee in the middle of the night is not considered normal, and it's not a good habit. But if you are waking up because of something else and then you notice your bladder is full and you just decide to empty in the bathroom, that's fine. But as long as something else is the reason that you're waking up and not your bladder waking you up.
Yeah, so would you say that people who do wake up to pee in the middle of the night, would you say that is a sign of circadian disruption?
That is a very good question. If they're waking up in the middle of the night, I do think circadian rhythm has a big role in this. So one, they could have circadian disruption for sure if their melatonin is not fully kicking in and they're not staying asleep and getting into deep sleep. But it could also have to do with what they're doing right before bed. So their nighttime routine, their bedtime and habits around nighttime. So
Yeah.
what are they eating at night? Are they drinking at night, drinking certain beverages? Maybe that they're having stuff that are bladder irritants, but then they go together. So if you are eating late at night and this is a habit and you're drinking these bladder irritants, I hope you're not having coffee at night, but if you're having things like juice and citrusy drinks and you're eating chocolate, these are all bladder irritants. And there's a whole bunch. If someone wants to know what are bladder irritants, you could just Google it, but there's a whole bunch of different ones. If someone is having all of these things at night, then most likely they do have circadian rhythm disruption as well. So they almost go hand in hand. If you're working on your circadian rhythm, you're likely not going to be doing these things, and you're likely going to not have these issues in the middle of the night. You're not going to be waking up because of your bladder at night. So yeah, they definitely,
Yeah.
it's like that umbrella that's like the overarching thing.
Right.
So you can cut these bladder irritants, but if you're doing other things, you might still be waking up at night because of your bladder, and it's your circadian rhythm.
Yeah, I used to drink my sleepy time tea way too close to bed, and that would cause me to go to the bathroom. And actually, and I've heard someone else say this too, but I tape my mouth shut now.
I love that.
And I don't know if that's the reason why I don't wake up to pee,
Oh,
but I
wow.
certainly don't wake up to pee as much. And I'm very mindful of when I have my, you know, when I'm going into the evening, when I have that relaxing cup of tea, I'm definitely not drinking it like right before bed, because that's just asking for a disruption during the night, right?
Yeah,
Even if it
absolutely.
is herbal, sleepy time relaxation tea, it's still a
Yeah,
huge, it's still a cup of water too close to bed, you know?
exactly.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting insight on the mouth taping. I hope somebody listening is going to do a study on that, because we all have some of us have Oura rings, and I'm correlating when I do mouth tape. I get the 99% blood oxygen. Like, it looks really good the nights that I mouth tape. So, but yeah, and I was gonna say, one that my husband and I both discovered that was a bladder irritant was, but those bubbly drinks, like
Yes.
yeah, they may not have, like, it's not Coca-Cola, but it's
Right.
like a natural. I don't know if there's something in the natural flavor, or is it the carbonic acid itself?
I think it has to do with the carbonated beverages, even if they're not
Okay.
sweet sodas or
Yeah.
pop or whatever you call it. Yeah, that those are also in the category. I think it has to do also with the type of sweetener they use. So depending on what beverage, sometimes it's that sweetener that could be a
Mhm.
bladder irritant as well.
We had a fabulous, if you haven't heard this interview, it's so good, with Robert Gourlay. He's a water researcher in Australia, and I think it was offline. He was coaching us on a sort of a water protocol with this negatively charged water, and so what he said, like, you're trying to get it's 1 liter a day. Like, is it 1 liter? No, 2 liters a day, split up into 500 mils. I think, if I remember. Don't quote me, because you have to go back and listen to the interview.
I
But
can't
Okay.
remember.
yeah, you can or can't?
I cannot remember.
So I tried. So I measure out these mason jars, and he says, make sure you get one of them before bed. So a lot of times I'm like, oh, I missed it. I was busy doing something, so I'll chug all this water. So my question to you, is there a time when you tell people to stop drinking liquids?
Yeah, so some people say an hour before bed, some people say 2 hours. I think to be on the safe side, if you are prone to getting up at night to urinate, I
Mhm.
would say maybe 2 hours before bed. That seems like a lot for me, but I don't have the issues where I have to get up at night to urinate. So for me, I would probably drink within the hour before bed. But if you are prone to getting up, I would stop 2 hours before bed. And just make sure you're drinking enough during the day so that you don't wake up and you're like, oh, I'm parched.
Right.
But if let's say you had sushi that day or something, and you had sushi with like soy sauce or something, because I know some people can't have their sushi without having the soy sauce. I'm actually one of those people. Guilty. Those are very, very salty. And they do get you very thirsty at night. So it depends on what you're having during the day. But yeah, I would try to stop 2 hours before
Okay.
bed. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions on that before we go to prolapse, Andeea?
No, we can go to that.
I'll just say I think I failed about 4 to 5 of the 5 of that, if that was a test that you give new clients. And it's been more just in the perimenopause, you know, kind of 40, like
It's common, yeah.
45-ish. Yeah, getting sort of
Even if you're not in menopause or perimenopause, it's so common that these are just what things that people do. It's like they're just bad habits that you don't realize that you're actually harming you're making the situation worse by allowing yourself to continue these habits.
so okay, before we go to prolapse, let's just address a couple of those. So can you train yourself to not pee that often, as often, if someone is peeing more than 8 times a day? And
Yeah,
how would they train
absolutely.
themselves to do that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking this because I am prepared to answer this one in detail if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah.
I have practical how-to for that. So it's called also urinary frequency or urgency issues. It's also called overactive bladder syndrome.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm sure you've heard overactive
Yes.
bladder. And so my top bladder training tips for an overactive bladder, because you can train, that's what you need to do. You need to train your bladder basically. If you are experiencing frequency and urgency issues, you're going too frequently to the bathroom. When you get an urge to urinate, that urge has nothing to do with how full your bladder is, if you have this issue, and it has everything to do with basically how that detrusor muscle, the inside here, that stretching of this detrusor muscle, how it's communicating to the micturition center in your brain. And so if you think of urge level of 1 to 4, I always go by urgency. What's the word I'm looking for? The sensation, an urge sensation on the level of 1 to 4, with 4 being very strong and 1 being very low. You really should be urinating when you have like an urge sensation of 3 or 4. However, if someone has overactive bladder syndrome, they always have a 3 or 4, even if they're urinating very little. So when you have the bladder is like your stomach, it stretches to the size of the contents that's inside. So the more stretch you have of that detrusor muscle, the higher your urgency sensation should be. So someone who has overactive bladder, if their bladder is stretching even just a little, they can get this like really strong sensation. So that's what we're trying to train. We're trying to train you to be able to allow more stretch, more filling of your bladder before you go to the bathroom to release, and before you get this like super strong sensation to urinate that's sent to your micturition center, because that micturition center will then send the message down to your pelvic floor. It'll send the message actually to the internal urethral sphincter of the bladder, which is smooth muscle. It's not voluntarily controlled, so that will open. But then also what's usually follows is the pelvic floor muscles, the external urethral sphincter. It's part of the pelvic floor muscle. It's skeletal muscle. Then that's the last thing holding the urine inside. So when you have leaking from this overactive bladder, it's because that external urethral sphincter is opening as well. So you already have that internal one opening because that brain sent the message to open because you need to urinate, even though your bladder's not full. And then the issue is you're running to the bathroom and you're leaking as you're running to the bathroom because that external urethral sphincter, which is one that you do have control over, but you just probably have to train it, that one is popping open. It's opening. That sphincteric roll is malfunctioning. So my top training, bladder training tip for an overactive bladder is this. So if the listeners are listening, they want to take notes, this is what you would do. So number 1, you want to create a pee schedule. So depending on how frequently you feel the urge to pee, you should establish a rule to pee at a set interval. And this interval can start with every 2 hours. I think every 2 hours is like it's like it's a good interval time. You should strive to urinate every 2 hours. So the first thing you do is when you wake up in the morning, you're gonna urinate first thing in the morning, and then you're gonna set your intervals for every 2 hours after that. So you can use it on your set it on your phone or a watch, and you set your intervals. And the goal is to urinate during those intervals. So if you reach the 2 hours and you don't have to urinate yet, you still want to sit on the toilet and you want to try to urinate. If you feel the urge to go to the bathroom before the next scheduled bathroom trip, so before the next interval, and you feel like, oh my gosh, it's only been an hour and I feel this strong urge of level 3 or 4 to go, you're going to follow these steps. Before running to the toilet, you're going to sit down, preferably on a chair with a hard surface or a couch, wherever you can sit. You're going to try to calm down. First thing you're going to try to do is a set of fast Kegels or pelvic floor muscle contractions. You're going to focus on counting. You're going to do 10. Okay, so you're going to do that first. And if that doesn't help bring the urge down, it should. But if that doesn't help, the next thing you can do while you're still sitting on a chair, you're going to take a deep breath, try to slow your breathing. I know this can be very stressful for some people if they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm about to pee my pants right now. It can be really hard to just kind of
Yeah, but
stop.
this is so good. Like, I'm so glad
Yeah,
I'm one of those people writing notes because I
okay,
have this
perfect.
issue. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's a practical thing you can do. Sit down, take some deep breaths, squeeze your knees together. And as you're squeezing your knees together, you're going to rock on your heel and on your toes back and forth. Remember how I mentioned that every time your heel strikes the ground, it's not the same if you're sitting, but there has to do with some transfer of energy and the muscles inside our body. That rocking back and forth will help with basically contracting the pelvic floor. So you're going to rock back and forth on your heels from heel to toe, heel to toe. And then if that's not working, if you need another thing to do, I always tell my clients, try to have like a video or something set up on your phone that you want to watch to distract you, or something funny, a funny video, a meme, or something that you can watch really quick. I know being in the quantum space, it's like you want to try to stay away from your phone as much as possible. But if this is helping you with bladder training, just do it. So you pull out that video and you watch it, help distract and help kind of relieve some of that stress. Because as I mentioned, this can be very stressful for some people.
For
So,
me, or
Read a book.
a lot of times we're told, oh, it's really bad to hold your pee. But in this instance, if you're a person who feels you meet this criteria for overactive bladder, it would be actually a part of the treatment, if you will, to practice holding
Yes.
so you can try to get to that 2-hour increment.
Exactly. And one
Okay.
way to know when you sit on the toilet, one way to know, like, was my urge level, was it okay? Did it match how much urine I have? Is that once you are sitting on the toilet and you begin to urinate, count your stream length in seconds. See how long that stream length is. If it's 8 seconds or more, then you're good. Anytime you're sitting on the toilet and you're urinating, and this is a habit of mine, like crazy. I do this all the time, especially during pregnancy. I was like, let me see, is this okay? Is this normal? I'll sit on the toilet, urinate, and I'm counting. I'm like, please get to 8. Please get to 8. And yeah, that's what you do. You count to see if you get to 8 seconds. And if you're at 8 seconds, then you're good. So if you are trying to follow these intervals and you're like, I just can't, I feel like my bladder's full, like I have to go, just go. But then do that little test to see, like, was your intuition correct? Was your bladder actually pretty full?
you actually you've made me realize an error in something that I've been trying to do. I've been trying to do that kind of calming distraction standing, because often I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking or something, and then I'll kind of lean on the counter and I'll get bladder pain. I'm wondering if, when you said the key is go and sit, and I know when I sit, it's like goes away. Like it's like, oh, I feel it's like it's calming. I'm support. My pelvic
Mm.
floor is supported.
It could
Yeah,
be that support. Mhm.
yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. If I mean some women can do it and they can hold it standing, but if you notice that it's causing you pain and it's better to sit, then definitely sit.
That's it. Okay. Andeea, do we have time to talk prolapse, or should we ask our key quantum questions?
Yeah, no, we have a couple more minutes.
Couple more minutes? Okay.
Mhm.
I guess I want the audience to know what prolapse is, because when I ask, I've got some question, like some quantum
Yeah,
questions I want to ask. Can you
absolutely.
describe, like, yeah, what is prolapse for people that don't know? And the big question is, can it be reversed?
Okay, so prolapse is when you have a laxity of the pelvic floor muscles. Sometimes, because I mentioned you do have more than one pelvic floor muscle, sometimes a tight pelvic floor muscle in one area can be pushing. So it may not have to do with laxity, it could do with tension as well, or a combination of both tense muscles and very loose, weak muscles. Basically, the pelvic floor is not at a normal resting length or state, and it is unable to support the pelvic organs. And these pelvic organs end up pushing in this vaginal canal. So basically, let me see if I can. Bladder, one of the most common prolapses, what will happen, sorry, what will happen, oh baby, is the bladder, I don't know if you can see this, ends up pushing on this side of the
Oh
uh,
yeah, yeah.
vaginal wall, and then it descends into the vaginal canal. So it's basically, oh baby, I'm sorry. So it's basically, it could be the bladder pushing
Mhm.
into the vaginal canal, and then that vaginal wall is drooping inwards. It could be the rectum pushing from the back into the vaginal canal, and then that wall is drooping inwards. It could be the uterus from the top pushing down into the cervix, or the cervix down into the vaginal canal. And then there's this like bulging sensation, and this bulging, sometimes there is no sensation, but you can visibly see it. If I'm doing like an internal exam or I'm looking, I'll have my clients cough, and if they're not properly contracting, or if their pelvic floor is not, they don't have that pelvic floor reflex and it's not contracting while they're coughing, you'll have this bulging of the pelvic organs, one of them, into the vaginal canal. So even if you don't physically feel it, it's great if you have no symptoms. That's wonderful, because that's usually the goal with pelvic floor therapy, is to be symptom free, even if there's still a prolapse there. But ideally, you would want to help strengthen that muscle so that you don't have any sign of prolapse. So your other question was, did that
Can
answer
it,
the first thing with
you
like,
did. Yeah.
okay.
So can it be reversed?
Right. So depending on the therapist you're talking to, some will never say that you can heal prolapse. And I hate that. I know hate is a strong word, but I really do believe you can. And the reason I'm saying is because I've always believed you can, and I have helped women in the past heal prolapse of grades 1 and 2. And then I myself experienced it, and I was able to reverse my prolapse after my first pregnancy. And hold on, I'm gonna try to get the baby to stop crying.
We actually can't hear him cry.
Yeah.
Or her
Oh,
cry.
okay, good,
Her
good, good.
cry. Yeah.
So yes, I personally would say that yes, you can reverse prolapse. Especially you can get from a grade 3 to a 2, or a grade 2 to a 1. And if you have a grade 1, absolutely you can completely reverse it. With four being the worst grade of prolapse.
Amy, would you say that, so in regards to prolapse and also a tighter pelvic floor, they say sitting is the new smoking, and like we're like sitting for 8 hours, 9 hours, some people even more than that every single day. Would someone be prone to prolapse for this prolonged sitting, or would they more be prone to like a tight pelvic floor? Or maybe neither, I don't know.
Definitely, you can be prone to pelvic floor tension, tight pelvic floor muscles, and pain like pain with sitting if you're sitting a lot and you get to this point where you have so much tension in your pelvic floor. It could also have to do with how you're sitting. Some people tend to sit on their tailbones and then they've got a lot of tension in the deeper pelvic floor muscles. And maybe they don't have tension that they're aware of when they're sitting, but then when they're intimate, there's a lot of tension with penetration. And that can have to do with sitting and being
Okay.
just sitting on your bottom all day long. It could have to do with how you're sitting. So if you're it's called sacral sitting, where you're kind of a rounded lower back and you're not so like upright, you're just really like slouched down and you're sitting more on your sacrum. The sacrum is the tailbone right there on the back. So if you're sitting more like this instead of like this, that can lead to pain. But sometimes if you're just sitting too much on your vulva, on the front part of your body, it's like riding a bike. Sometimes people, when they're riding a bike too much, they can get that pain in their pelvic floor just from
Okay.
having so much pressure there. So it's just about finding a good balance, using certain cushions to help. That can help a lot
Okay.
with
Good question.
sitting. But we are meant to be able to sit. So, but we aren't without pain. I know we did a lot more things back in the day in the squatted position. So ideally we would be squatting and doing everything squatted, but that's not practical nowadays. But we should be able to sit without pain, and we should be able to sit with but if you notice that you are getting pain, it's good to shift around like I just did, shifting in your chair, or even stand up.
Yeah.
Use a different chair or a ball, like a yoga
Go take
ball.
a light break.
Take a break. Exactly. You should be getting light breaks too. So
Well, I wanted to ask you about hypopressive, but I think we'll shift to our quantum questions because
okay.
we just talked
Yeah,
about
so
light time wise. Yeah, we got to have you back on for sure because there's a whole bunch more questions we have.
There's so much.
Oh, there's so much to the subject. I know, and so many is so needed. Okay, or sorry, you want? Yeah, you're on. You're on.
yeah. So Amy, we always ask everybody, it's our signature question. What does quantum healthy mean to you?
I love that. So quantum healthy to me, I personally feel like there's no point in doing all these things like bladder training and trying to eliminate bladder irritants at night. And this is because I'm a pelvic floor therapist, so I'm going through this lens as well. If you're not doing all the other things, the circadian rhythm things, if you're staying up super late at night on your computer, not protecting your eyes from this artificial light, if you're never waking up to see sunrise, if you're never getting outside for light breaks, especially if you're in front of a screen all day long, if you're not doing any of those things, but you're trying to do all these other things that in traditional pelvic floor therapy, most of the time these things will help people, but there's no point because you reach a plateau. You get to a point where it's like, okay, it got a little better, but it's not really 100% better. And being quantum healthy to me means doing all those other things, mitigating artificial light, getting your sunlight, your sunrise, your sunset, eating at proper times in the day, cold plunging once in a while. If you're not getting enough red light, using that red light in the day, if you have to use an infrared or red light panel during the day, that's what quantum healthy to me, that's what it means. Trying to stay in tune with nature as much as possible. Because there's no point. Like otherwise, like I said, you get to a plateau. And actually, quick, I guess they call it plug-in. I'm not sure how to use that term, but I'm like, I think it's the plug-in. For me, with my prolapse healing journey, I got to plateau with all these traditional things. I was doing the exercises, I was doing all the breath work, the things that I normally teach. And I got to a place where I'm like, okay, I'm like 85% healed. Like I need to get to this 90, 95, 100, almost completely like fully healed. And what helped me was starting to incorporate like, so I was getting sunrise light, but I wasn't getting that sunrise infrared and red light directly in that area. So I started using a red light panel there, and then also cold plunging. That was like my secret, like cold plunging with, let me pull it out and show you guys, with basically a vaginal weight because it offers proprioception. You guys know what that is, like a Kegel weight? I have a bunch of things I was gonna show you guys, but I guess
Oh,
we can
yeah.
just
Oh, shoot.
save it for next time. So to get the audience curious.
It's not the wand. That's
No.
okay.
So
Whoa.
that goes inside what, and then you
Yeah.
do the cold, and then you do your cold plunge.
That's what I was doing. So this offers proprioceptive input to the, because it's like a sprain. It's like when you sprain a muscle and that's kind of like what a prolapse is. So you're putting this in that area in the vaginal canal, and it kind of pushes it back into place. And then I would cold plunge. So it offers that proprioceptive input, the ability for that muscle to know where it is in space and know where it should be. And then I'm doing the cold plunging to kind of like seal the deal. In my mind, it all made sense. And also, all the other benefits you get from cold plunging, but this just kind of like was an added benefit. So that's
Okay.
what I did. And I kept doing that, and I was doing it almost like 5 days a week, the cold plunging, and that was a huge difference. That took me to like nearly 100% healed. So that's what quantum healthy means to me. It's like getting out of the box, getting out of the traditional, like this is the only pelvic floor stuff you can do to heal, but using those quantum strategies, I
What's
would
the
say I was pretty creative about thinking of this, and it worked.
what's the
So
name? What's the name of that? And do you sell them? Do we need to affiliate?
well,
Because we're gonna have all these
I am
women.
an affiliate. I don't sell them personally, but this is through a company called Intimate Rose, and she's a physical therapist who's she specializes in pelvic floor, and she developed basically all of these Kegel weights or vaginal weights. She calls them vaginal weights,
Okay.
and they're different sizes. The darker the color, the heavier they are. So I wasn't
Okay.
using them for the purpose of strengthening at that point. When I would get in the cold plunge, I would use just basically for proprioceptive input. So I use the lightest one, but it's Intimate Rose basically. And I do have a code. I
Oh,
think you get
perfect. I'll make sure
20%.
it's in the show notes for people to
Yeah,
use.
it's like Amy 28. And she also makes, maybe in the next talk, I can show you the rectal dilators, I can show you the vaginal dilators, I can show you the pelvic wands. I have a pelvic wand here. I love this tool. I use this postpartum with my first, and I'm probably going to use it soon for this one to check on tension, like to check muscles for tension. Yeah. So I
Oh,
don't know if
we
that answered what is quantum healthy, but
oh, you did. Oh my
No, it
goodness.
did.
yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
I love how you're looking at the sun and the cold, these quantum health strategies to help.
They're necessary. You need to add these in. Everyone needs to add these in, period.
Amy, what do you, besides obviously your coaching, you must like, are you working right now? Are you off? And are you on maternity
So I'm in my like postpartum, what do we call it,
phase?
maternity leave, but I will start seeing clients again in January.
Okay. So that is
And
that on Zoom too? Like, or just
yeah,
local?
it's virtually, and then I have some clients that I see face to face, and I told my clients that if there's an emergency and you need to see me and I'm still in this postpartum, that's fine. A lot of my clients actually come to my house now. I used to do concierge where I go to them and they love that. But after having my first daughter, I kind of switched that up, and everyone's been okay with coming to me. And it's all been referrals, like word of mouth. So you're comfortable having these people come to your home. I am, at least, because they're all like, I met them through my midwife or my doula or my chiropractor or something like that. So yeah, they come to me, but I have courses online and a
Okay.
program online, a 6-week program online, and then I do offer virtual like one-to-one coaching if needed as well.
Is that the 6-week one? Is that called Revive?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Revive.
Okay. Right.
I
Okay.
used to include 3 one-to-one calls in that offering,
Okay.
but at a different price point. And I just found that it just wasn't doable for a lot of people. So I lower the price and just have the program individually sold. And if you need to
Okay.
purchase like one-to-one coaching calls, you could do that separately.
Okay.
Awesome.
And yeah, I'd say what's next, but it sounds like you got a lot on your plate already
It's
with,
okay.
with baby and yeah.
Oh, what's next? Yeah,
Yeah, what's next?
raising this one. What are we doing? that's pretty much it. I'm waiting for January to start picking up clients again and trying to figure out this new systems with this little one, because it's definitely harder. It's different. And when my husband goes back to work, he's home right now, but when he goes back to work, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll figure it out. I have no choice.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Amy, for coming on to the podcast, taking this
Thank you
time,
for having me.
and Zara as well.
Zara, yeah. Zara,
And
yeah.
yeah, thank you for, I would just say specifically finding quantum and these health strategies and mixing that with pelvic floor therapy
Yeah.
and yeah, and being an innovator with trying, using cold therapy. And
Yeah, I love it. Thank you
for
so much for having me,
Oh, you're
guys.
welcome. I think you're going to help so many women have hope, and ease
Yeah,
symptoms. Yeah, and give relief and
yeah,
freedom. Freedom is like what, I think there are women that are afraid to leave their house because they don't know these tips. They don't know
exactly.
Yeah.
how
I
to
think you
control
said
this.
it. It's the hope. A lot of women feel like there's no hope for so many of these conditions because they're sent home. The doctor's like, "Oh, it's normal. You had a baby. What did you expect?" And they just brush these things off as being normal, and they're not. But we'll have to leave the baby talk for next time. I
Yes.
love to
Yes,
talk
yes,
about all that too.
Okay.
yes.
We'll go back on our calendar and book it because we're ready.
Yep,
Awesome.
we're ready.
Okay, awesome, awesome.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much,
much.
Amy. And thank you
Thank you.
everybody for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Andeea at andeearay.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.